Amber Whitaker's father knew something was wrong the moment her daily text messages stopped. For 3 weeks, his 28-year-old daughter had been sending him photos of Cancun sunsets, margaritas by the pool, and excited updates about her new life with the man she planned to marry. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March 2019, the messages stopped completely. By Wednesday evening, Robert Whitaker was on a plane to Mexico, his gut churning with a fear he couldn't name. What he would discover in the following weeks would expose a criminal network that had been operating within Cancun's luxury tourism industry for more than 6 years, preying on foreign tourists and leaving behind a trail of devastation that authorities had somehow failed to notice. Amber's dream of a tropical paradise wedding had led her straight into the hands of predators who specialized in exploiting vulnerable women, and by the time her family realized what was happening, it was already too late. The case would eventually reveal at least 7 victims, expose corruption reaching into the highest levels of local government, and force the international community to confront an uncomfortable truth about what happens in places where foreign tourists disappear into a world designed to make them feel safe. This is the story of how one American woman's trust was weaponized against her, how a romantic fantasy became a living nightmare, and how the people who loved her refused to let her vanish without answers. This is the story of Amber Whitaker and the dark crimes hidden behind the pristine beaches and luxury resorts of Cancun. Amber Marie Whitaker grew up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in a white 2-story house with a wraparound porch that her father had built himself. Born in 1991, she was the oldest of 2 children, protective of her younger sister Chelsea, from the moment their parents brought the baby home from the hospital. Their mother, Patricia, worked as an elementary school teacher, while their father, Robert, owned a small construction company that employed 15 local workers. It was a solidly middle-class American childhood, the kind built on Friday night high school football games, family dinners around the kitchen table, and summer vacations to nearby lakes. Teachers at Jefferson High School remembered Amber as bright and outgoing, always surrounded by friends, always volunteering for school activities. She played volleyball for 3 years and spent her senior year as editor of the school yearbook. Her best friend from those years, Katie Morrison, would later tell investigators that Amber had always been the kind of person who saw the best in everyone, sometimes to her own detriment. She wanted to believe people were good, Katie said. She gave second chances even when people didn't deserve them. That kindness made her beautiful, but it also made her vulnerable. After graduating in 2009, Amber attended the University of Iowa, majoring in marketing with a minor in Spanish. The decision to study Spanish wasn't random. From a young age, Amber had been fascinated by other cultures and dreamed of a life that extended beyond the Iowa cornfields. She studied abroad for a semester in Madrid during her junior year, an experience that deepened her love for Spanish-speaking cultures and convinced her that her future would somehow involve international work. Her professors noted her natural talent for languages and her ability to connect with people from different backgrounds. Upon graduating in 2013, Amber moved to Chicago and landed a job at a mid-sized marketing firm that specialized in hospitality and tourism accounts. She was good at her work, creative and detail-oriented, quickly earning promotions and the respect of her colleagues. By 2016, she was managing significant hotel and resort accounts, traveling occasionally to properties across the United States to oversee campaigns and promotional events. Her life seemed stable and promising. She shared an apartment in Wicker Park with 2 roommates, had an active social life, and maintained close relationships with her family despite the distance. Her romantic life had been less successful. There had been a serious boyfriend during college, Michael Chen, who broke her heart when he moved to California for graduate school and ended their relationship via phone call. After that, she dated sporadically, but never seemed to find someone who matched her vision of a partner. She wanted someone adventurous, she told Chelsea during one of their frequent phone conversations. Someone who wasn't afraid to take risks and see the world. Most of the guys in Chicago just wanted to talk about their careers and their 401k plans. Those who knew Amber well described her as trusting but not naive, adventurous but not reckless. She researched everything extensively before making major decisions, kept detailed lists and plans, and generally approached life with careful consideration. Her father had taught her to be self-reliant and practical. She could change a tire, manage her own finances, and wasn't afraid to travel alone. But she also had a romantic streak, a belief in fate and destiny that sometimes overrode her practical instincts. She read novels about grand adventures and epic love stories, and part of her always believed that life held something extraordinary waiting just around the corner. In early 2017, at 26, Amber seemed content with her life but restless for something more. She had been promoted to senior account manager and was earning a comfortable salary, but the work had become routine. Her apartment was nice, her friends were wonderful, yet she felt a growing sense that she was meant for something different, something bigger. When her colleagues suggested a girls' trip to Mexico for spring break, Amber agreed immediately. She had never been to Cancun or the Riviera Maya, despite handling marketing for several resorts in the region. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for a break from routine, a chance to recharge and experience the destinations she promoted but had never actually seen. She had no way of knowing that this vacation would redirect the entire course of her life, setting in motion events that would lead to her disappearance and expose a criminal operation that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The moment that would change everything happened on Amber Whitaker's third day in Playa del Carmen. She and 3 friends from Chicago had booked a week at a modest beachfront hotel, planning to spend their days on the beach and their nights exploring the famous Quinta Avenida with its restaurants, bars, and shops. It was March 2017, and the weather was perfect, the ocean warm and impossibly blue. Amber felt more relaxed than she had in months, finally disconnected from work emails and Chicago deadlines. On that third day, the group decided to take a day trip to Tulum to see the ancient Mayan ruins overlooking the Caribbean. They hired a driver through their hotel, a standard tourist excursion. The driver who arrived was Carlos Mendoza, though Amber wouldn't learn until much later that this wasn't his real name. He was 32 years old, tall and handsome with dark hair, an easy smile, and perfect English that he explained was the result of having studied hospitality management in San Diego for 2 years before returning to Mexico to work in the family business. During the hour-long drive to Tulum, Carlos entertained them with stories about the region, pointing out local restaurants and hidden beaches that tourists rarely discovered. He was charming and knowledgeable, and Amber found herself drawn to his enthusiasm for his home country. When they reached the ruins, Carlos offered to serve as their tour guide rather than simply waiting in the parking lot with the other drivers. He knew the history intimately, explaining the significance of the temples and the astronomical precision of the ancient structures with genuine passion rather than rote memorization. Throughout the tour, Carlos directed most of his attention toward Amber. He asked about her life in Chicago, her work in marketing, her thoughts on Mexico. She was flattered by his interest and found herself opening up in a way she rarely did with strangers. There was something about his manner, confident but not arrogant, attentive but not overwhelming, that put her at ease. Her friends noticed the connection and teased her gently about it, encouraging her to exchange numbers with him before they left. At the end of the day, as Carlos drove them back to Playa del Carmen, he asked Amber if he could take her to dinner the following evening. She hesitated for only a moment before agreeing. Her friends were enthusiastic, insisting that a vacation romance was exactly what she needed. That night in their hotel room, Amber and her friends looked up Carlos on social media. His Facebook profile showed him at various upscale restaurants and resorts, always well-dressed, always surrounded by friends who appeared successful and attractive. There were photos of him with what he identified as his family, including an elegant older couple he tagged as his parents standing in front of a large hacienda-style home. Everything about his online presence suggested exactly what he had claimed: a successful young man from a prosperous Mexican family. Their first date exceeded Amber's expectations. Carlos picked her up in a luxury SUV and took her to an exclusive restaurant in a boutique hotel, the kind of place where the hostess greeted him by name and the chef sent out complimentary dishes. Over fresh ceviche and perfectly grilled fish, Carlos told her about his life. He claimed his family owned several properties in the Cancun and Playa del Carmen area, including partial ownership in 2 resorts and a successful property management company that handled luxury vacation rentals. He had 3 siblings, all involved in various aspects of the family business. He had studied in the United States and briefly considered staying there, but felt called to return to Mexico to help expand the family enterprises. He asked about her dreams, her goals, what she wanted from life beyond her marketing career. Amber found herself confessing things she rarely shared on first dates: her restlessness with her current life, her desire to do something meaningful, her fantasy of living somewhere beautiful and building a life that felt less ordinary. Carlos listened intently, nodding as if he understood completely. "I felt the same way when I was in California," he told her. "Sometimes you have to take a leap to find what you're really meant to do." The rest of the week passed in a blur of romantic dinners, beach walks, and long conversations. Carlos took time off from his work to spend with Amber, showing her parts of the coast that tourists never saw, introducing her to local foods and hidden restaurants. He was attentive without being possessive, generous without being showy. Her friends were impressed by him and encouraged Amber to stay in touch with him after they returned to Chicago. "This one seems different," her friend Melissa said. "He seems genuinely interested in you, not just looking for a vacation hookup." On Amber's last night in Mexico, Carlos told her he didn't want their time together to end. "I know this is fast," he said as they walked along the beach under the stars, "but I feel something with you that I've never felt before. I want to see where this goes. Can we make that happen?" Amber felt the same pull, the same sense that she had stumbled into something unexpected and potentially important. They agreed to maintain a long-distance relationship, to visit each other as often as possible, and to see if the connection they felt could survive beyond vacation romance. For the next 18 months, they made it work. Carlos visited Amber in Chicago 3 times, staying for long weekends and charming her friends and family with gifts and stories. Amber traveled to Mexico 4 times, staying with Carlos in what he said was his apartment in Cancun, a luxurious penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hotel zone. He introduced her to people he claimed were his business associates and family friends. Everything seemed to confirm the life he had described to her. Her father, Robert, was less convinced, noting privately to his wife that something about Carlos felt off, though he couldn't articulate exactly what bothered him. "He's too smooth," Robert said, "too much like a salesman." But Amber was in love, more deeply than she had ever been. Carlos was everything she had hoped to find: adventurous, successful, devoted to her. He called her every day, sent flowers to her office, planned elaborate surprises for her visits. By the fall of 2018, Amber knew she wanted to build a life with him. The only question was where that life would be. The proposal happened during Amber's visit to Cancun in November 2018. Carlos had planned everything meticulously: a private boat trip to Isla Mujeres, followed by a sunset dinner on a secluded beach. As they watched the sun sink into the Caribbean, Carlos dropped to one knee and pulled out a ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds that he said had belonged to his grandmother. "Amber Whitaker, will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Amber said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down her face as Carlos slipped the ring onto her finger, but the proposal came with an unexpected complication. Carlos explained that he had been offered a significant opportunity to manage a new luxury resort that his family was developing in partnership with international investors. It was a 5-year commitment that would require him to be in Cancun full-time. "I can't ask you to leave your life in Chicago," he said, "but I also can't let this opportunity pass. It's the kind of chance that comes once in a career." Amber spent the next week in an emotional turmoil. She loved her job, her friends, her proximity to her family in Iowa, but she also loved Carlos and felt that if she let him go, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She called Chelsea and her parents from her hotel room, explaining the situation. Her mother was supportive but cautious, reminding Amber that she had always been independent and capable of adapting to new situations. Her father was more direct. "You barely know this man," he said. "You've spent maybe 6 weeks total with him over a year and a half. That's not enough to make a decision like this." But Chelsea, who was 25 and had always looked up to her older sister, encouraged her to follow her heart. "You've always played it safe," Chelsea said. "Maybe it's time to take a risk on something that makes you happy. If it doesn't work out, you can always come back. You're smart enough to land on your feet." Carlos sweetened the offer with a proposal that addressed some of Amber's concerns. He suggested she could work remotely for her Chicago firm part-time, while also helping him develop marketing strategies for the new resort and other family properties. "You have expertise we need," he explained. "This could be a partnership in every sense, professional and personal." He showed her architectural plans for the resort, impressive renderings of a boutique property that would cater to high-end international guests. "Your name could be on this," he told her. "You could help build something from the ground up instead of just promoting other people's properties." The opportunity was seductive. Amber had always wanted to do something more meaningful than managing marketing campaigns for chains hotels. The idea of being involved in creating a new resort, of using her skills in a more direct and creative way, appealed to the part of her that had felt restless for years, and underlying everything was her love for Carlos, her belief that they were meant to be together, and her fear that if she said no, she would lose him forever. After returning to Chicago, Amber spent 3 weeks in agonizing deliberation. She made lists of pros and cons, consulted with her friends, and lay awake at night trying to envision her future. Her firm offered to let her work remotely on a trial basis, maintaining some of her accounts from Mexico. Her father made one last attempt to talk her out of it, offering to hire a private investigator to look into Carlos's background more thoroughly. Amber refused, feeling that it would be a betrayal of trust. If she was going to marry this man, she needed to trust him. In mid-December 2018, Amber made her decision. She would move to Cancun in February 2019, giving herself 2 months to wrap up her life in Chicago, find someone to sublease her apartment, and say goodbye to friends and family. The wedding was planned for December 2019, giving them almost a year to settle into their life together before making things official. Carlos was overjoyed, promising her that she would never regret the decision, that their life together would exceed her wildest dreams. Amber's father attended her going-away party in late January with a heavy heart. He hugged his daughter tightly and whispered in her ear, "If anything ever feels wrong, you call me immediately. I will be on the next plane." "Promise me," Amber promised, touched by his concern but confident that his worries were unfounded. "I'm not a kid anymore, Dad," she said gently. "I know what I'm doing." But Robert Whitaker couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As he watched his daughter board her plane to Mexico in early February 2019, he had no way of knowing that his instincts were correct, that Carlos Mendoza was not who he claimed to be, and that Amber was flying toward a nightmare that would destroy their family and expose secrets that had been carefully hidden for years. Amber Whitaker arrived in Cancun on February 12, 2019, stepping off the plane into humid tropical air that immediately made her Chicago winter coat feel ridiculous. Carlos was waiting for her at the airport with a bouquet of orchids and a smile that temporarily silenced any remaining doubts. He loaded her 3 large suitcases into his SUV and drove her to what he said was their new home, a spacious 2-bedroom apartment in a luxury complex overlooking the hotel zone. The apartment was beautifully furnished with modern fixtures, a wraparound balcony with ocean views, and amenities that included a gym, pool, and 24-hour security. "This is incredible," Amber said as she walked through the space, running her hands along the granite countertops and admiring the floor-to-ceiling windows. Carlos wrapped his arms around her from behind. "This is just the beginning," he murmured. "Everything I have is yours now. We're building this life together." The first week felt like an extended vacation. Carlos took time off from his work to help Amber settle in, showing her the local grocery stores, the best restaurants, the areas of Cancun that were safe versus those she should avoid. He introduced her to his friends over dinners at upscale restaurants, always picking up the check with platinum credit cards and waving off her offers to contribute. "You're my guest here," he would say. "Until you're earning in pesos, everything is on me." Amber met several people Carlos introduced as his business associates. There was Rafael Ortega, who Carlos said was his business partner in the property management company. Rafael was in his late 30s, heavy-set with a loud laugh and expensive watches that he seemed to collect. He spoke limited English but was friendly to Amber, toasting her arrival with shots of tequila and telling Carlos repeatedly that he was a lucky man. Then there was Elena Vargas, a striking woman in her early 40s who Carlos introduced as the general manager of one of the family's resort properties. Elena was sophisticated and elegant, dressed in designer clothes and speaking perfect English with only a trace of an accent. She seemed genuinely interested in Amber's background in marketing and suggested they meet for lunch to discuss how Amber might contribute to marketing efforts for various properties. "I'm so glad Carlos found someone with your expertise," Elena said. "We've been needing fresh perspectives on how to reach American tourists more effectively." These early introductions reinforced the narrative Carlos had constructed. Everyone seemed successful, professional, connected to legitimate businesses. Amber felt her father's concerns were unfounded, that she had made the right choice in trusting Carlos and taking this leap. But small inconsistencies began to emerge almost immediately. On her 3rd day in Cancun, Amber asked Carlos when she could see the new resort property he was supposedly managing. He had shown her architectural renderings and talked extensively about the project, and she was eager to see the actual location. Carlos hesitated before explaining that the property was in the early stages of development and wasn't yet safe for visitors due to ongoing construction. "The investors are very particular about security," he said. "Once we have proper fencing and safety protocols in place, I'll take you there. For now, it's just dirt and equipment." When Amber asked if she could at least drive by to see the location, Carlos changed the subject, suggesting they go to the beach instead. It was a subtle deflection, but Amber noticed it. She also noticed that Carlos became vague when she asked specific questions about timelines for the resort's opening or which international investors were involved. "These are confidential business matters," he told her with a slightly irritated tone. "You understand that I can't share everything until the proper announcements are made." Amber apologized for pushing, attributing his reaction to the stress of managing such a large project. But the interaction left her slightly unsettled. Over the next few days, she observed other small oddities. Carlos received frequent phone calls that he would take in another room, speaking rapidly in Spanish. When she asked who had called, he would give vague answers. Business stuff, nothing important. He left the apartment for meetings several times a week, often late at night. which struck Amber as strange for someone in resort management. When she commented on it, Carlos explained that international investors were in different time zones and conference calls had to happen at odd hours. More troubling was Carlos's increasing possessiveness. He began asking her detailed questions about where she was going when she left the apartment, even for simple errands. He suggested she use a specific taxi service rather than the ride-sharing apps she preferred. When Amber mentioned wanting to explore the city on her own, Carlos warned her that Cancun could be dangerous for foreign women who didn't know their way around. "I don't want to control you," he said. "I just want to keep you safe. This city has areas where tourists shouldn't go alone." Amber tried to maintain her daily communication with her family, as she had promised. Every morning, she would send her father and sister photos and brief updates about her new life. "The apartment is beautiful. Carlos is taking good care of me. I'm settling in well." But after the first week, Carlos began commenting on how much time she spent on her phone. "You're here now," he would say. "You need to focus on building your life in Mexico, not staying attached to Chicago." Amber explained that staying in touch with her family was important to her, non-negotiable. Carlos backed off but seemed irritated by her insistence. It was during her second week in Cancun that Amber met someone who would become crucial to her story. She was at a cafe in the hotel zone, working on her laptop and trying to maintain some of her remote work for her Chicago clients, when she struck up a conversation with an American woman at the next table. The woman introduced herself as Jessica Brennan, originally from Portland but living in Cancun for the past 5 years. Jessica was in her mid-30s, warm and friendly, working as a freelance photographer specializing in destination weddings and resort photography. The two women bonded immediately over being Americans navigating Mexican life. Jessica was curious about what had brought Amber to Cancun, and Amber found herself sharing her story. The whirlwind romance, the engagement, the move. Jessica listened attentively, asking questions about Carlos and his family business. When Amber mentioned that Carlos's family partially owned several resorts, including a new development project, Jessica's expression shifted slightly. "Which resorts, if you don't mind me asking?" she said. "I work with most of the major properties in the area." Amber realized she didn't actually know the specific names of the resorts Carlos claimed his family owned. He had shown her photos and talked about them in general terms. But now that she thought about it, he had never actually taken her to see any of them. She explained this to Jessica, who nodded slowly. "That's interesting," Jessica said carefully. "The resort community here is pretty tight-knit. If there was major new development happening, I would probably know about it through my work." The conversation planted a seed of doubt that Amber tried to ignore. Jessica gave Amber her contact information and suggested they meet for lunch later that week. "I've been here long enough to know the ins and outs of the expat community," Jessica said. "If you ever need advice or just want to talk to someone who understands what it's like to be an American woman here, please reach out." Over the following days, Amber found her unease growing. She began paying more attention to inconsistencies in Carlos's stories, noting when details didn't match up with things he had told her previously. She tried to ask him direct questions about his family's businesses, but he always found ways to evade giving specific answers. She noticed that despite supposedly being involved in resort management, Carlos never went to an actual office and didn't seem to keep regular business hours. His days were filled with meetings that he couldn't or wouldn't explain, phone calls conducted in private, and long periods where he was simply absent without clear explanations of where he had been. The apartment itself began to feel less like a home and more like an expensive cage. Carlos had given Amber a key, but discouraged her from giving it to anyone else or sharing the security code. He explained that the building had strict rules about visitors and that it was safer if only they had access. But Amber was beginning to feel isolated. cut off from any independent life outside of Carlos's carefully controlled world. 3 weeks after her arrival, Amber made a decision that would prove significant. She reached out to Jessica Brennan and agreed to meet for lunch. She needed to talk to someone outside of Carlos's orbit, someone who might be able to provide perspective on whether her concerns were valid or if she was simply struggling with the normal adjustment to a new country and relationship. That lunch meeting would be the beginning of Amber's realization that she had made a terrible mistake, and that the man she had moved across an international border to marry was not who he claimed to be. By early March 2019, Amber Whitaker's initial excitement about her new life in Cancun had been replaced by persistent anxiety that kept her awake at night. The luxury apartment that had seemed like a paradise now felt like a carefully decorated trap. Carlos's behavior had become increasingly controlling and erratic, and the inconsistencies in his story had grown too numerous to dismiss. The night that changed everything began with a rare opportunity. Carlos received a call around 8 in the evening that visibly agitated him. He spoke in rapid Spanish, his face tense, before hanging up and telling Amber that he had to go out for an emergency meeting that couldn't wait. "It's one of the investors," he explained. "There's a crisis with permits for the resort. I need to go handle it in person." Amber asked if she should come with him, but Carlos was adamant that she stay home. "This is boring business stuff that will take hours," he said. "I'll be back late. Don't wait up." After Carlos left, Amber tried to work on her laptop, catching up on emails from her Chicago clients, but she found herself unable to concentrate, her mind churning with questions that had been building for weeks. Why had Carlos never taken her to meet his family, despite claiming they were close and involved in his business? Why couldn't she find any online presence for the resort development he was supposedly managing? Why did Carlos always pay for everything in cash and discourage her from setting up her own Mexican bank account? Around 10 o'clock, Amber noticed that Carlos had left his personal laptop on the kitchen counter, something he usually kept locked in the bedroom closet. He always claimed it contained sensitive business information that needed to be kept secure. But this evening, in his rush to leave, he had forgotten it. The laptop was open, not even locked with a password. For several minutes, Amber debated whether to look through it. She felt sick at the thought of violating Carlos's privacy, of confirming that she had become the kind of person who snooped through her partner's belongings. But her instincts were screaming that something was deeply wrong, and she knew this might be her only opportunity to find answers. With trembling hands, she sat down at the kitchen counter and began scrolling through the open browser windows. What she found would haunt her for the rest of her life, however long that would be. The laptop contained hundreds of files organized in folders with women's names she didn't recognize: Jennifer, Melissa, Catherine, Amanda. Each folder contained photographs, scans of passports and driver's licenses, and detailed documents with personal information. The women in the photos were young, attractive, and overwhelmingly American or European. Many photos appeared to be taken without the women's knowledge: candid shots in restaurants, on beaches, walking on streets. Amber's hands shook as she opened a folder labeled Amanda. Inside were copies of Amanda's Colorado driver's license, her passport, what appeared to be love letters written in English, and dozens of photos. There were also financial documents showing wire transfers of money, records of apartment rentals, and something that made Amber's blood run cold: a document titled Client Contracts, with dates, amounts, and coded descriptions that seemed to refer to the women as merchandise. She opened another folder, this one labeled Jennifer. The pattern repeated: personal documents, intimate photos, financial records. But Jennifer's folder also contained something else: police reports in Spanish that Amber struggled to translate using her phone. The reports mentioned a missing American tourist, last seen in Playa del Carmen. Investigation pending. The dates matched the timeline of the documents in the folder. Amber felt like she might vomit. She forced herself to keep looking, to understand what she had uncovered. There were email exchanges between Carlos and Rafael Ortega discussing logistics, transportation schedules, payment confirmations, communication about properties and clients in a language that was clearly coded but unmistakably sinister. One exchange discussed a problem with someone who had become difficult and needed to be relocated. Another casually mentioned Eleanor's skill at recruiting and her impressive track record. The worst discovery was a folder with Amber's own name on it. Inside were copies of her passport and driver's license. Photos of her in Chicago that she had never known were taken. Screenshots of her social media profiles, and detailed notes about her background. Single parents, deceased. Sister in Iowa, limited financial resources. No significant assets. High vulnerability score. Recommended for premium client base. Extended cultivation successful. Amber realized with absolute horror that she had been selected and targeted. Her romance with Carlos hadn't been a chance encounter or a real relationship. She had been identified as a viable victim, carefully researched and deliberately seduced. Every intimate moment, every promise, every profession of love had been a calculated move in an operation she was only beginning to understand. She grabbed her phone and immediately tried to call Chelsea, her fingers fumbling with the screen. Chelsea answered on the second ring, cheerful and unsuspecting. "Hey, sis. What's up?" Amber tried to speak but found her voice failing. "Chelsea, I need help. Something is very wrong here. I need to leave. I need you to help me get out of here." The fear in Amber's voice immediately alarmed Chelsea. "What's happening? Are you safe right now?" Amber began explaining what she had found, speaking quickly and quietly, terrified that Carlos might return at any moment. She tried to send photos of the laptop screen to Chelsea, but her hands were shaking so badly that the pictures came out blurred. "Chelsea, I'm serious," Amber whispered. "Carlos isn't who he said he was. I think I'm in danger. I think other women have been hurt. I need to get out of Mexico as soon as possible." Chelsea's response was immediate and clear. "Listen to me carefully. Go to the bedroom right now and pack only what you can carry in one bag. Your passport, your credit cards, your phone. Then leave the apartment and go somewhere public. A hotel, a restaurant, anywhere with people. I'm going to call Dad and we're going to figure out how to get you out of there tonight." But before Amber could respond, she heard the sound of a key in the front door. Terror flooded through her. She had been so focused on the laptop that she hadn't heard Carlos returning. "Chelsea, he's back," she whispered into the phone. "What do I do?" Chelsea's voice was urgent. "Hang up and act normal. Don't let him know you found anything. Pretend you're just tired. I'm calling Dad right now." Amber ended the call and quickly closed the laptop windows, trying to make it look like she hadn't touched anything. She moved to the couch and grabbed a magazine, attempting to appear casual. But when Carlos walked through the door, he immediately knew something was wrong. His eyes went straight to the laptop on the counter, then to Amber's face. She had never been good at hiding her emotions, and she could feel the terror written across her features. Carlos stood frozen in the doorway for a long moment. Then his expression changed into something Amber had never seen before. All the warmth, all the charm, all the careful cultivation of the romantic lover disappeared instantly. What remained was cold, calculating, and terrifying. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. His voice was controlled but carried an undercurrent of rage that made Amber's entire body tense. "I don't know what you mean," Amber said, but her voice trembled. Carlos moved toward the laptop and opened it, checking the browser history. His jaw clenched. "How much did you see?" he demanded. "How much did you send to your sister before I came back?" Amber tried to stand up. but Carlos moved between her and the front door. "We need to have a conversation," he said, "and you need to understand something very clearly. You've made this much more complicated than it needed to be." He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapidly in Spanish. Within minutes, there was a knock at the door. Rafael Ortega and another man Amber didn't recognize entered the apartment. Rafael looked at Carlos with raised eyebrows. "We have a situation." Carlos nodded toward Amber. She found the files. She contacted her sister. Rafael cursed in Spanish. "How much time do we have?" Carlos checked his watch. "Not much. The sister will call the father. They'll try to reach the embassy. We need to move her tonight." "Move me where?" Amber asked, her voice rising with panic. "What are you going to do to me?" The unrecognized man, large and intimidating, positioned himself between Amber and any possible exit. Carlos sat down across from her, his expression now businesslike and detached. "Amber, I actually did care about you. You were supposed to be different, but you couldn't leave things alone. You had to look where you shouldn't have looked. Please," Amber begged, "just let me go. I'll leave Mexico. I won't tell anyone. I'll say it didn't work out and I came home. Please." Carlos shook his head. "You've already called your sister. You've already told her something is wrong. Do you think she's going to drop it? Do you think your father is going to accept that everything is fine? You've created a problem that requires a solution." Rafael took out a syringe from his jacket pocket, and Amber felt true terror for the first time in her life. She tried to run, but the large man grabbed her effortlessly. She screamed, but Carlos calmly explained that the apartment was soundproofed and that her neighbors wouldn't hear anything. "This will be easier if you don't fight," Rafael said in heavily accented English. "We're going to take you somewhere to wait while we figure out what to do. If you cooperate, maybe this ends well for everyone." Amber felt the needle enter her arm, and the world began to blur. As her consciousness faded, her last coherent thought was of her father's face and his warning before she left Chicago. "If anything ever feels wrong, you call me immediately." She had called, but she had waited too long. As darkness claimed her, Amber Whitaker vanished from the world of people who loved her and entered a nightmare from which there might be no escape. Chelsea Whitaker had never felt panic like this before. After her sister's terrified phone call cut off abruptly, Chelsea immediately tried calling back, but the line went straight to voicemail. She tried 3 more times over the next 10 minutes with the same result. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely dial her father's number. When Robert Whitaker answered, Chelsea didn't even say hello. "Dad, something's wrong with Amber. Something's really wrong." She called me scared and said she found something on Carlos's laptop about other women and that she needed to leave immediately. Then he came back and she hung up. Now I can't reach her. Robert felt his stomach drop. How long ago was this? Maybe 20 minutes. "Dad," she sounded absolutely terrified. "I've never heard her like that. What do we do?" Robert's construction business had taught him to stay calm during crises. But this was his daughter, not a work problem. "Give me 5 minutes to think. Keep trying to call her. I'm going to reach out to some contacts and figure out our options." Robert immediately called the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, navigating through automated systems until he reached an actual person. He explained that his daughter, an American citizen, had called from Cancun reporting that she was in danger and had subsequently gone silent. The embassy official was sympathetic, but explained that they received many calls from worried family members and that unless there was clear evidence of a crime, they couldn't take immediate action. "Has your daughter filed a police report in Cancun?" the official asked. "Has she visited the consular office there?" "She called less than an hour ago," Robert said, frustration mounting. She said she found evidence that her fiancé had been involved with other women who may have been harmed. She was trying to leave when he came back. Now I can't reach her. Sir, I understand your concern, the official replied. But we need to follow protocol. I'm going to connect you with our consular section. They can advise you on the proper steps. The next 2 hours were a bureaucratic nightmare. Robert and Chelsea took turns calling Amber's phone, the apartment's building security, the local police, and various embassy numbers. The language barrier made communication difficult, and the Mexican authorities they reached seemed unconcerned about an American woman who had been out of contact for only a few hours. She is probably out with her boyfriend, one officer suggested through a translator. American women sometimes worry their families for no reason. By midnight, Robert had booked a flight to Cancun, leaving at 6 the next morning. He called Chelsea back. I'm going down there. I'm not waiting for anyone's permission or protocol. Will you stay by your phone and keep trying to reach her? Chelsea agreed, but her voice was thick with tears. Dad, what if something really bad happened? What if we're already too late? We're not too late, Robert said with more confidence than he felt. Amber is smart and strong. She'll find a way to let us know where she is. But when Robert arrived in Cancun 16 hours later, exhausted and frantic, he found a situation even worse than he had imagined. The luxury apartment building where Amber had been living with Carlos was real and located in an upscale area of the hotel zone. But when Robert showed Amber's photo to the security guard and explained that he was her father and needed to check on her, the guard claimed to have no record of any American woman living in the building. Mr. Mendoza, in apartment 7B, he has no girlfriend living with him. The guard insisted in broken English. Robert felt a chill run through him. But she's been living here for over a month. She sent me photos from the balcony. Let me show you. He pulled out his phone and showed the guard photos Amber had sent of the ocean view from her apartment. The guard looked uncomfortable. I don't know about that, sir. But Mr. Mendoza is not here. He left yesterday for business travel. He will not be back for some time. Where did he go? I don't know, sir. He does not tell me his business. Robert pushed harder, but the guard refused to provide any more information or allow Robert access to the building without Carlos's permission. Finally, Robert had no choice but to leave and seek help from local authorities. At the nearest police station, Robert filed a missing person report, but the officers seemed skeptical. Your daughter is an adult who moved to Mexico voluntarily to be with her boyfriend, one officer asked through a translator. Maybe they had a fight and she went to stay somewhere else. Robert tried to explain about the laptop, the evidence Amber had found, the sudden inability to contact her, but without Amber physically present to make a complaint, the police were reluctant to treat it as an urgent matter. The American consulate in Cancun was slightly more helpful. A consular officer named David Harris met with Robert and listened to his story with growing concern. What you're describing sounds like it could be part of a larger pattern we've been seeing, Harris admitted. There have been several cases of American women coming to Mexico for relationships and then losing contact with their families. But prosecuting these cases is complicated because we're dealing with Mexican jurisdiction and often limited evidence. What do you mean, several cases? Robert demanded. How many women have gone missing like this? Harris hesitated before answering. I can't share specific numbers or ongoing investigations, but I can tell you that your daughter's situation is being taken seriously. We'll coordinate with local police and do everything we can to locate her. Robert didn't want vague assurances. He wanted action. He spent the rest of that day posting on social media, reaching out to American expat groups in Cancun, and desperately trying to find anyone who might have information about Carlos Mendoza or his supposed resort business. That evening, he received a message from Jessica Brennan, the photographer Amber had befriended. Jessica had seen Robert's posts in a Cancun expat group and reached out immediately. Mr. Whitaker, Jessica wrote, I'm so sorry about Amber. I met her a few weeks ago, and we had lunch twice. She told me about Carlos and some things she had noticed that concerned her. I offered to ask around about him because something felt off about his story. The resort development he claimed to be managing doesn't exist. I checked with every major property developer in the area. Nobody's heard of it. Robert asked Jessica to meet him at his hotel. When she arrived, she brought information that confirmed his worst fears. I've been living here for 5 years and working in the resort industry the whole time, Jessica explained. Carlos Mendoza's name doesn't come up in any legitimate business context. The people he introduced Amber to as his business associates, Rafael Ortega and Elena Vargas. Those names were flagged to me by a police contact as persons of interest in some criminal investigations. What kind of criminal investigations? Jessica glanced around nervously before answering. Human trafficking. There's been a pattern of foreign women, mostly tourists, who disappear from the Cancun and Playa del Carmen area. Most of them had been in relationships with local men before they vanished. The police don't talk about it publicly because it would devastate tourism, but people who live here know. Robert felt like he might be sick. You're saying you think Amber was deliberately targeted? Jessica nodded sadly. I think she was selected because she fit a profile. Young, single, employed but not wealthy. No close family ties beyond you and your other daughter. When I had lunch with Amber the second time, she mentioned that Carlos seemed to know a lot of personal details about her life that she didn't remember telling him. That's a red flag. It means he had been researching her before they even met. How many other women? Robert asked, his voice breaking. I don't know exact numbers, Jessica admitted, but I've heard about at least 4 or 5 American women who came here for relationships and were never heard from again over the past few years. The families couldn't get answers. Eventually, most of them gave up and went home. Robert looked at Jessica with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. I'm not giving up. I'm not leaving Mexico without my daughter. I need your help. I need contacts with local police who will actually investigate this. I need to know everywhere Carlos Mendoza might have taken her. Please. You're the first person who's given me any real information. Jessica took a deep breath. I'll introduce you to a reporter I know who's been investigating these cases. And I know a detective in the federal police who's been frustrated by the lack of support he's gotten from local authorities. But Mr. Whitaker, you need to prepare yourself. These are dangerous people we're talking about. If Amber uncovered their operation, they're not going to just let her go. The message was clear and devastating. Robert's daughter was in the hands of criminals who had successfully made other women disappear, and the authorities who should have been protecting foreign tourists had apparently been looking the other way for years. But Robert Whitaker hadn't built a successful construction company by backing down from difficult challenges. If the system wasn't going to help him find Amber, he would find her himself. He just hoped that when he did, it wouldn't be too late. The investigation into Amber Whitaker's disappearance finally gained traction on the 4th day after Robert's arrival in Cancun, when Mexican Federal Police Detective David Martinez was assigned to the case. Martinez was a 47-year-old career investigator who had spent the last decade working on organized crime cases in Quintana Roo. Unlike many of his colleagues, Martinez had a reputation for being incorruptible, refusing bribes from the cartels and criminal organizations that operated in tourist areas. That reputation made him unpopular with some fellow officers, but respected by those who actually cared about justice. Martinez agreed to meet with Robert and Jessica at a cafe away from the main tourist areas. He was a compact man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much corruption to be easily impressed. He listened carefully as Robert explained everything about Amber's disappearance, from the initial romance to the terrifying phone call to Chelsea. When Robert finished, Martinez asked to see the photos Amber had sent from the apartment, and any records of wire transfers or other financial transactions related to Carlos. Robert pulled out every document he had. Screenshots of text conversations between Amber and Carlos. Receipts from gifts Carlos had sent. The few photos Amber had shared of Carlos and his supposed business associates. Martinez studied everything with professional attention, occasionally making notes on a small pad. When he finished, he sat back and folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm going to be honest with you about what we're dealing with here. The people who took your daughter are professionals. This isn't random. It's part of an organized operation that's been functioning in this region for several years." "You know about them?" Robert asked. "Why haven't they been stopped?" Martinez's expression darkened. "Because they're very careful. They have connections in local government and law enforcement. And frankly, too many people benefit from looking the other way. Tourism is our biggest industry. Stories about American women disappearing are bad for business. There's pressure to keep these incidents quiet and resolve them as isolated cases rather than acknowledge a pattern." "But there is a pattern," Jessica interjected. "I've been here 5 years and I've heard about multiple cases." Martinez nodded. "There is absolutely a pattern. We've been trying to build a case against this organization for 3 years, but it's been difficult to gather evidence that will stand up in court. Witnesses are scared to testify. Corruption makes investigations difficult, and by the time we locate victims, they've often been moved out of the country or are too traumatized to participate in prosecution." Robert felt rage building in his chest. "So you're telling me my daughter was taken by a criminal organization that you know about but can't stop, and that other families have been through this with no justice?" Martinez met his eyes directly. "I'm telling you that we're going to do everything possible to find your daughter, but you need to understand the obstacles we face. These people are sophisticated. They don't leave obvious evidence. They move victims through a network of properties, many of which are legitimate vacation rentals that tourists use every day. They have lookouts, paid informants, and people in positions to warn them when police get close." "Tell me about Carlos Mendoza," Robert said. "Who is he really?" Martinez pulled out a folder he had brought with him. "Carlos Mendoza is one of several aliases used by a man named Arturo Rivas. Born in Chiapas, 46 years old, he has a criminal record going back 25 years. Fraud, forgery, identity theft. He came to Cancun about 8 years ago and got involved with a trafficking organization run by a group that operates under the cover of property management and vacation rentals. But Amber said he took her to nice restaurants. He had expensive cars," Robert protested. "Where does that money come from?" "Human trafficking is extremely profitable," Martinez explained. "These organizations make millions of dollars. They identify vulnerable targets, usually foreign women with some money, but not wealthy families that would hire lawyers and investigators. They cultivate relationships, sometimes over months or years. They get the women to move to Mexico voluntarily, which avoids kidnapping charges. Once the women are here and isolated, they're forced into situations they can't escape from." "What kind of situations?" Robert asked, though he dreaded the answer. Martinez glanced at Jessica before responding. "It varies. Some women are forced to work in establishments that cater to tourists, essentially sexual slavery. Others are used to launder money through fake relationships and marriages. Some are sold to individuals who want companions they can control completely. The worst cases, we find bodies months or years later." Robert felt like he might be sick. "Are you saying my daughter is being held for sexual slavery?" "We don't know yet," Martinez said carefully. "But based on what you've told me about what she found on the laptop, evidence of other victims, financial records, I believe she uncovered documentation of the organization's operation. That makes her situation more dangerous because she's now a witness to criminal activities, not just a victim." "Can you raid the apartment?" Can you arrest Rafael Ortega and Elena Vargas? Robert demanded. We need warrants based on evidence, Martinez explained. Your daughter's disappearance alone isn't enough if Carlos claims she left voluntarily. We need to establish probable cause that she was taken against her will, and that there's evidence of criminal activity at specific locations. That's what we're working on right now. How long will that take? Robert's voice rose. Every hour you're processing paperwork is another hour my daughter is with these monsters. Martinez didn't take offense at Robert's anger. I understand your frustration. I have daughters of my own, but if we move too fast without proper evidence, we risk these people destroying evidence or moving your daughter somewhere we can't find her. We need to be strategic. Over the next week, Martinez coordinated with American FBI agents who had been monitoring reports of American citizens disappearing in Mexico. The case was assigned to Agent Sarah Chen, who had worked trafficking cases for 15 years and had developed contacts throughout Latin America. Chen flew to Cancun and met with Martinez and Robert, bringing with her files on other similar disappearances over the past 6 years. We believe your daughter's case is connected to at least 6 others, Chen explained, spreading photos and documents across a conference table. All American women between ages 25 and 35. All came to Mexico for romantic relationships with men who turned out to be using false identities. All disappeared within weeks or months of arriving, with minimal evidence of what happened to them. Did you find any of them? Robert asked. Chen's expression was somber. We found one, Nicole Harper, after 8 months. After 8, she had been held at a property outside Playa del Carmen and forced to work at what was presented as a legitimate business, but was actually a front for trafficking. She was severely traumatized, but agreed to testify. That testimony is part of what helped us identify the organization's structure. Where is Nicole now? Protected witness status in the United States, Chen said. Her testimony gave us names and details about how the operation works, but it wasn't enough to get convictions because key evidence disappeared and witnesses recanted under intimidation. However, it did give us a map of properties and individuals associated with the organization. Chen showed Robert a chart that looked like something from a crime movie. At the top were names Robert didn't recognize, leaders of the trafficking organization. Below them were several tiers of people with various roles. Carlos Mendoza's real name, Arturo Rivas, appeared in the middle tier, designated as a recruiter. Rafael Ortega was listed as logistics coordinator. Elena Vargas was marked as manager of front businesses. This is insane, Robert said, staring at the elaborate chart. How is this operating openly in a major tourist destination? Because they're careful and they have protection, Martinez interjected. They pay bribes to local officials and police. They operate through businesses that look legitimate on paper. And they prey on people who are outside their home countries and don't know how to navigate Mexican systems. What's the next step? Robert asked. We focus on Rafael Ortega, Martinez explained. He's the weak link. He has previous arrests for lesser crimes and isn't as ideologically committed to the organization as some of the others. If we can pressure him, he might give up information about where they're holding your daughter and other victims. That night, federal police units conducted simultaneous raids on 3 properties associated with Rafael Ortega. One was a luxury condo where he supposedly lived. Another was a warehouse registered to one of his shell companies. And the third was a vacation rental property that had been flagged in Nicole Harper's testimony. At the warehouse, police found evidence that made Robert's blood run cold. Laptops containing files similar to what Amber had described finding on Carlos's computer. Photos of dozens of women, personal documents, detailed notes about their backgrounds and vulnerabilities. Financial records showing transactions worth millions of pesos. And most damning, a ledger that appeared to track women by code names, recording dates, locations, and payments received. Rafael Ortega was arrested at his condo and brought in for interrogation. Martinez and Agent Chen worked on him for hours, presenting the evidence found at the warehouse and explaining that he was facing life in prison for human trafficking charges. Rafael initially demanded a lawyer and refused to cooperate, but as the hours passed and the weight of evidence became clear, his resolve began to crack. "It was just business," Rafael finally said, his voice defeated. "We provided a service. Rich men wanted companions. We found them companions. Nobody was supposed to get hurt." Agent Chen leaned forward. "Where is Amber Whitaker?" Rafael shook his head. "I don't know. Carlos was handling her. After she found the files, he took her somewhere to keep her quiet until he could figure out what to do." "Where would Carlos take her?" Martinez demanded. Rafael hesitated, clearly weighing his options. "If I tell you, what happens to me?" "You'll still face charges," Martinez said, "but cooperation will be considered in your sentencing." Rafael sighed heavily. "There are properties, safe houses where we keep women who cause problems. One is in Tulum, another in Puerto Morelos. But Carlos has connections outside Cancun too. If he felt too much pressure, he might have moved her to Merida or even Chiapas." "Give us addresses," Chen ordered. Rafael provided locations for 3 properties, and Martinez immediately coordinated search teams. Within hours, federal police and FBI agents were raiding all 3 locations simultaneously, hoping to find Amber before anyone could be warned and move her again. Robert waited at the federal police headquarters, pacing and praying, desperate for news that his daughter had been found alive. At the first property in Tulum, police found evidence of recent occupancy, but no victims. At the Puerto Morelos location, they found 3 young women, 2 Russian and 1 Colombian, being held in conditions that left no doubt this was a trafficking operation. The women were terrified and injured, barely able to communicate with authorities. But it was at the 3rd location, a compound outside Playa del Carmen, that searchers made the discovery that would break Robert Whitaker's heart and expose the full horror of what had been happening behind Cancun's luxury resort facade. The property in Playa del Carmen sat at the end of a long dirt road, hidden behind tall walls and thick vegetation. From the outside, it looked like many vacation properties in the area. A 2-story Spanish colonial-style building with a tile roof and decorative ironwork. But inside was something far more sinister than any tourist destination. Federal police arrived at dawn, surrounding the property before anyone inside could be alerted. Martinez led the tactical team that breached the front door, finding 2 men who immediately tried to flee through a back exit. Both were apprehended after a brief chase. One was identified as Diego Ruiz, listed in the organization's records as a guard and handler. The other was Antonio Herrera, who would later be confirmed as one of the organization's enforcers. The inside of the building had been modified in ways that revealed its true purpose. Bedroom doors had locks on the outside. Windows were covered with bars that looked decorative but were welded solid. There was a surveillance room with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the property and even in some of the bedrooms. In a back office, police found more laptops, files, and documentation of the operation's activities. But the most important discovery was in the basement. 4 women, all foreign, all being held against their will in conditions that would later be described by prosecutors as torture. They were malnourished, showed signs of physical abuse, and were clearly terrified. When Martinez announced that they were police and that the women were being rescued, most broke down sobbing. One of the women was Amber Whitaker. She had been there for 9 days since the night Carlos had drugged and taken her from the apartment. She was dehydrated, had bruises on her arms and face, and had clearly been through an ordeal that had left her traumatized. But she was alive. Martinez immediately called Robert. "We found her. She's alive. She's injured and will need medical attention, but she's alive." Robert collapsed in relief, tears streaming down his face as he thanked Martinez over and over. Chelsea, who had flown to Cancun 2 days earlier to help her father, broke down beside him. The sisters had always been close, and the thought of losing Amber had been unbearable. "When can I see her?" Robert asked, his voice shaking. "She's being taken to a private medical facility now," Martinez said. "Once doctors clear her, we'll arrange for you to reunite. But Mr. Whitaker, I need you to prepare yourself. She's been through something traumatic. She may not be the same person she was before." Robert didn't care. His daughter was alive, and that was all that mattered in that moment. Amber was transported under guard to a medical facility that specialized in treating trafficking victims, where doctors examined her and found evidence of physical assault, malnutrition, and psychological trauma consistent with her having been held captive and subjected to abuse. She was reluctant to speak to anyone except Chelsea, who was allowed to sit with her that first day. "Amber, I'm so sorry," Chelsea whispered, holding her sister's hand. "I'm so sorry we didn't get to you sooner." Amber's voice was hoarse from crying. "I was so stupid. I should have listened to Dad. I should have known Carlos wasn't real." "You're not stupid," Chelsea said firmly. "You were targeted by professionals. This isn't your fault." Over the next several days, as Amber recovered physically, she began to tell investigators what had happened after Carlos had drugged her that night. She described waking up in a small room with bars on the windows, disoriented and terrified. Raphael and another man had been there, explaining that she had caused problems by discovering information she wasn't supposed to know. They told her she would be kept there until Carlos decided what to do with her, whether to move her to another location or to simply make her disappear permanently. Amber described days of isolation, minimal food, and constant fear. She was guarded at all times and threatened with violence if she tried to call for help or escape. The other women in the basement had tried to comfort her, but they were all traumatized and hopeless. One woman, a Russian named Irina, had been there for 4 months and had given up believing she would ever be freed. The worst part, Amber told Agent Chen during her formal testimony, was knowing that Carlos had never loved me. Every moment we spent together, every promise he made, it was all calculated to make me vulnerable. He studied me like I was a project, and I fell for every single lie. Agent Chen listened with professional compassion. "What you experienced is exactly what these organizations do. They're very skilled at manipulation. The fact that you recognized something was wrong and tried to escape shows strength, not weakness. Your discovery of those files may have saved other women from the same fate." The FBI's investigation expanded significantly based on evidence found at the Playa del Carmen property. The laptops and files revealed a network that extended beyond Cancun to other tourist destinations in Mexico and Central America. There were records of more than 40 women who had been trafficked through the organization over 8 years. Most were American or Canadian, but there were also victims from Europe and South America. Each victim's file contained detailed notes about how they had been recruited, what lies they had been told, and what had happened to them after arriving in Mexico. Some files ended with notes like, "Relocated to Merida, client satisfied," or "Returned to home country, paid settlement for silence." But other files had more ominous endings. "Subject became difficult. Problem resolved," was a phrase that appeared multiple times. Martinez coordinated with police in other Mexican states to conduct additional raids based on the information recovered. Over the following 2 weeks, 8 more victims were rescued from various locations. Dozens of people associated with the organization were arrested, including several local officials who had been taking bribes to ignore the operation's activities. The scope of the criminal enterprise shocked even experienced investigators who thought they had seen everything. Carlos Mendoza, whose real identity was confirmed as Arturo Rivas, was arrested 4 days after Amber's rescue. He had been hiding at a property near the border with Belize, preparing to flee the country. When federal police surrounded the location, he attempted to negotiate, offering to provide information about other criminal organizations in exchange for leniency. Martinez refused. "You're going to prison for a very long time," he told Arturo. "The only question is whether it's 20 years or 50. Elena Vargas was arrested at the Cancun airport attempting to board a flight to Argentina using a fake passport. In her luggage, police found $200,000 in cash and multiple sets of identity documents. Her role as a manager of front businesses made her one of the most valuable defendants for building the prosecution's case against the organization's leadership. The investigation also uncovered shocking evidence of corruption. 2 local police officers, a municipal official responsible for business licenses, and a state tourism department employee were all arrested for accepting bribes to look the other way. Bank records showed they had received regular payments for years, compensated for their complicity in an operation that destroyed lives while operating in plain sight. Robert stayed in Cancun for 3 more weeks as Amber recovered and provided testimony to investigators. The relationship between father and daughter, already close, was strengthened by the shared trauma of her ordeal and rescue. Amber apologized repeatedly for not listening to his concerns about Carlos, but Robert refused to let her take responsibility. "You're a victim," he told her firmly. "You did nothing wrong. The people who did this are responsible, not you." Chelsea returned to Iowa after a week, but stayed in constant contact with her sister. The bond between the sisters, always strong, was now forged in the fire of a shared nightmare. Chelsea blamed herself for not insisting that Amber leave Mexico immediately after that first panicked phone call, though Amber assured her there was nothing more she could have done. Jessica Brennan visited Amber twice in the medical facility, bringing books and offering the support of someone who understood the complexities of life as an American woman in Mexico. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," Jessica said, "but I'm also grateful you're alive. So many families never get that closure." Amber thanked Jessica for her role in helping Robert find her. "If you hadn't reached out to my father and connected him with Detective Martinez, I might not have been found in time." The arrest of so many people and the discovery of so many victims created a media firestorm. International news organizations covered the story extensively, focusing on the sophisticated nature of the operation and how it had operated for years within Cancun's luxury tourism industry. The Mexican government, embarrassed by the revelations of corruption and law enforcement failures, promised reforms and increased oversight of vacation properties and resort operations. But for Amber, the media attention was another trauma. She didn't want to be known as a victim or have her story told publicly. Agent Chen arranged for her to return to the United States quietly, avoiding reporters and cameras. On a morning in early April 2019, less than 2 months after she had arrived in Mexico full of hope for a new life, Amber boarded a flight home with her father, leaving behind a nightmare that would take years to process and heal from. As the plane lifted off from Cancun, Amber looked down at the tropical paradise below and felt only revulsion. The beautiful beaches, the luxury resorts, the pristine waters, all of it was now associated in her mind with betrayal, violence, and the darkest aspects of human nature. She closed her eyes and leaned against her father's shoulder, grateful to be alive but knowing that the woman who had arrived in Mexico full of dreams was gone forever. The trial of Arturo Rivas, Rafael Ortega, Elena Vargas, and 17 other defendants began in September 2019 in a federal courthouse in Cancun. The proceeding would take 4 months and become one of the most significant trafficking prosecutions in Mexican history. Robert Whitaker attended every single day of testimony, sitting in the front row and making sure the defendants saw him, a constant reminder that their victims had families who refused to let them be forgotten. The prosecution was led by a team of Mexican federal prosecutors working in coordination with the FBI and Department of Justice attorneys. The evidence they presented was overwhelming and disturbing. Dozens of laptops and hard drives containing thousands of files documenting the operation's activities over 8 years. Financial records showing more than $15 million had moved through the organization during that time. Testimony from 23 victims, including Amber, who described their recruitment, captivity, and abuse. The courtroom was packed each day with journalists, victims' families, and observers shocked by the scope of what was being revealed. Security was intense, with metal detectors and armed guards, because there had been credible threats against witnesses and prosecutors from associates of the organization who remained at large. Arturo Rivas, the man who had pretended to be Carlos Mendoza and had spent more than a year carefully grooming Amber for victimization, showed no remorse during the proceedings. He sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, occasionally taking notes, rarely showing emotion. His attorney argued that his client had simply been operating a consensual escort service for wealthy clients, and that any claims of force or coercion were exaggerations by women who regretted their decisions. The defense strategy was as cynical as it was predictable. They attempted to portray the victims as willing participants who had made poor choices and were now seeking sympathy and financial compensation. They questioned why some victims had not immediately reported their situations to authorities, or had sent messages to family members saying they were fine during their captivity. They suggested that the relationships had been genuine and that the women had only claimed trafficking after things went wrong. The prosecution systematically destroyed these arguments. Agent Chen testified about the psychological manipulation tactics used by trafficking organizations, explaining how victims are deliberately isolated, threatened, and made dependent on their captors. Dr. Maria Lopez, a psychologist specializing in trauma, explained how trafficked women often comply with their captors' demands, including sending reassuring messages to family members, because they fear violence or believe cooperation is their only path to survival. The prosecution presented evidence of the lies Arturo had told Amber, documents proving he didn't own or manage any resorts, records showing his real identity and criminal history, testimony from previous victims describing identical patterns of behavior, the whirlwind romance, the promises of partnership, the gradual isolation, the ultimate revelation of a criminal operation. The prosecution demonstrated that Arturo's entire relationship with Amber had been fabricated specifically to make her vulnerable to exploitation. When Amber took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She had struggled for weeks with the decision to testify, knowing it would mean publicly reliving her trauma and facing the man who had betrayed her so completely. But ultimately, she decided that her testimony was necessary not just for her own case, but to help ensure convictions that might prevent other women from becoming victims. Amber spent 2 full days on the witness stand, first answering questions from prosecutors and then enduring cross-examination from defense attorneys. She described meeting Arturo in Playa del Carmen, the year-long relationship that had seemed perfect, her decision to move to Mexico based on his promises, and the growing realization that nothing he had told her was true. She described in painful detail the night she discovered the files on his laptop and what had followed. The drugging, the captivity, the constant fear. The defense attorney tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she had known about Arturo's other relationships and had been complicit in the operation. He implied she had fabricated her story after things went wrong. But Amber remained composed, carefully answering each question and refusing to be intimidated. "I trusted him completely," she said clearly. "I believed everything he told me because he was that skilled at deception. I was a victim of a sophisticated criminal operation, not a participant in one." When asked why she hadn't been more skeptical of Arturo's claims about his resort business, Amber responded with quiet dignity. "I had no reason to doubt him. He showed me documents, introduced me to people who confirmed his story, took me to expensive places that suggested wealth. Everything was designed to make his lies believable. If it had been easy to see through his deception, he wouldn't have been successful at victimizing so many women for so many years." The prosecution also called Rafael Ortega as a witness. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Rafael had agreed to testify about the organization's structure and operations. His testimony was devastating to the remaining defendants. He described in detail how the operation worked, how recruiters like Arturo identified vulnerable women through social media and travel patterns, how they built elaborate false identities and backstories, and how they used romantic relationships to make victims voluntarily come to Mexico where they could be controlled. Rafael testified that the organization had annual meetings where recruiters compared strategies and shared information about successful tactics. They had literally studied psychology and manipulation techniques to improve their success rates. "We treated it like a business," Rafael admitted, his voice flat. "We had targets, metrics, evaluations. The better you were at recruiting women who wouldn't cause problems, the more money you made." When asked how many women he personally had been involved in trafficking, Rafael estimated between 15 and 20 over 5 years. When prosecutors showed him files from the laptops found at the warehouse, he identified specific women and described what had happened to them. Some were still being held at properties in other locations. Others had been sold to individuals in private transactions. A few had escaped and returned to their home countries, and several, Rafael admitted with visible discomfort, had died either from medical neglect, suicide, or violence from clients who had purchased time with them. The revelation that multiple victims had died shook the courtroom. Family members of missing women began demanding investigations into whether their loved ones might be among the deceased. Agent Chen promised that the FBI would coordinate with Mexican authorities to identify all victims and provide whatever closure was possible to families who had spent years not knowing what happened to their daughters, sisters, and friends. Elena Vargas chose not to testify, maintaining her innocence despite overwhelming evidence of her involvement. Her attorney argued that she had simply been a manager at legitimate businesses and had no knowledge that trafficking was occurring. But prosecutors presented evidence of Elena personally receiving payments tied to specific victims and communicating with other members of the organization about logistics of moving women between properties. One of the most powerful moments in the trial came when Irina Volkov, the Russian woman who had been held at the Playa del Carmen property for 4 months, testified about her experience. She described believing she was coming to Mexico for a legitimate job at a luxury resort, only to find herself imprisoned and forced to serve clients who paid for her time. She described brutal treatment, constant threats, and the slow erosion of hope that she would ever be freed. "When I saw police coming through the door, I thought I was hallucinating," Irina said through a translator. "I had given up believing I would ever get out." The fact that Amber's father didn't give up, that he kept pushing authorities to investigate, that's why we were found. If he had stopped looking, I would probably be dead by now. The emotional testimony affected everyone in the courtroom. Several jurors were seen wiping away tears. Even the judge, who had presided over many difficult cases during his career, appeared moved by the victims' accounts of what they had endured. Robert, sitting in his usual front row seat, felt validated in his refusal to accept the official brush-offs he had encountered when he first arrived in Cancun, demanding action. The trial also included testimony from the corrupt officials who had enabled the operation. 2 former police officers admitted they had received monthly payments to ignore reports of suspicious activity at certain properties. A tourism department employee confessed he had received bribes to approve business licenses for fake companies that served as fronts for trafficking operations. Their testimony illustrated how the organization had woven itself into the legitimate infrastructure of Cancun's tourism industry, making it almost invisible to casual observers. In his closing argument, the lead prosecutor spoke directly to the jury about what was at stake. "This case is about more than just these defendants," he said. "It's about whether we will tolerate criminal organizations operating openly in our country, destroying lives while hiding behind legitimate businesses. These defendants made millions of dollars by exploiting vulnerable women who trusted them. They destroyed families, ended lives, and corrupted officials who were supposed to protect our citizens and visitors. Your verdict will send a message about whether that behavior will be tolerated or punished." The defense attorneys argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the prosecution had unfairly characterized business relationships as criminal conspiracies, and that their clients were being scapegoated for broader problems in Mexican law enforcement and border security. But their arguments rang hollow against the mountain of evidence and victim testimony presented over 4 months. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning with verdicts. The courtroom was packed with victims, family members, journalists, and observers, everyone holding their breath as the verdicts were read. Arturo Rivas was found guilty on all counts, including human trafficking, kidnapping, fraud, money laundering, and criminal organization. The maximum sentence he faced under Mexican law was 50 years. Rafael Ortega was found guilty on multiple counts and faced 30 years. Elena Vargas was convicted of trafficking and money laundering, facing 25 years. Of the 17 other defendants, 15 were convicted on various charges. Only 2 minor participants were acquitted due to insufficient evidence directly linking them to the trafficking operation rather than just the legitimate businesses used as fronts. When the judge read the final guilty verdict, Robert closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could undo the trauma his daughter and other victims had experienced, but it was accountability. Sentencing hearings were held 3 weeks later. Amber submitted a victim impact statement that was read in court but chose not to attend in person, unable to face her abuser again. Her statement described the ongoing trauma she lived with every day, the nightmares, the trust issues, the fear that would never completely go away. "Arturo Rivas stole more than 2 months of my life," her statement read. "He stole my ability to trust, my sense of safety, and my belief that people are fundamentally good. I will spend years recovering from what he did to me, and I know some parts of me will never fully heal." Robert did attend sentencing and was allowed to address the court. Standing at the podium, facing Arturo for the final time, Robert spoke with controlled rage. "You are a predator who targeted my daughter because you thought she was vulnerable and alone. You were wrong. She has a family who loves her and who will never stop fighting for her. You thought you could make her disappear without consequences. But here we are, and you're going to prison for the rest of your life. I hope every day you spend behind bars, you think about all the women whose lives you destroyed and feel even a fraction of the pain you caused." Arturo showed no reaction, staring straight ahead as if Robert's words meant nothing. But several other defendants appeared emotional as victim after victim gave impact statements describing how the organization had shattered their lives. The judge, clearly moved by the testimony, imposed maximum sentences on the primary defendants. Arturo received 50 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. Rafael got 35 years. Elena received 28 years. The other convicted defendants received sentences ranging from 8 to 20 years. As the defendants were led out of the courtroom in shackles, Robert finally felt something like closure, though he knew the real work of healing was just beginning for Amber and the other survivors. 6 months after the trial ended, significant changes were already being implemented in oversight of vacation rental properties and resort operations in Cancun and throughout Quintana Roo. The state government established a special task force dedicated to investigating human trafficking and appointed Detective Martinez to lead it. Federal authorities increased their presence in tourist areas and created new protocols for responding to reports of missing foreign tourists. The Mexican Tourism Board, initially resistant to acknowledging the problem for fear of harming the industry, eventually recognized that addressing trafficking openly was better than allowing it to fester in the shadows. They partnered with American and Canadian authorities to create awareness campaigns warning tourists about romance scams and providing resources for those who suspected they might be victims of trafficking operations. Changes to business licensing requirements made it more difficult for criminal organizations to operate behind fake companies. Property owners were required to conduct more thorough background checks on long-term renters, and tourism police received specialized training on recognizing signs of trafficking operations. The reforms weren't perfect, and enforcement remained inconsistent, but they represented progress that would hopefully prevent some future victimization. For Amber Whitaker, recovery was a slow and difficult process. She returned to Chicago, but found she couldn't go back to her old apartment or her old job without being overwhelmed by memories of the person she had been before Mexico. She moved back to Iowa temporarily to be closer to her family, seeing a trauma therapist 3 times a week and slowly rebuilding her sense of safety and identity. The nightmares persisted for months. She would wake up screaming, believing she was still in that basement room in Playa del Carmen. She struggled with trust issues that made relationships difficult. Even casual encounters with men at grocery stores or restaurants could trigger panic attacks. Her therapist explained that recovery from this kind of trauma took years, not months, and that setbacks were normal. But Amber refused to let what happened define her entire life. With her therapist's support, she began volunteering with an organization that helped trafficking survivors access resources and navigate the criminal justice system. She found that using her experience to help others gave her a sense of purpose that facilitated her own healing. "I can't change what happened to me," she told Chelsea during one of their frequent phone calls, "but I can try to make something positive come from it." 2 years after her rescue, Amber agreed to participate in a documentary about her case. She had been approached by multiple production companies, but had declined, not ready to revisit the experience publicly. But she eventually decided that telling her story might prevent other women from being victimized. The documentary, which aired on a major streaming platform, received millions of views and generated renewed attention to the issue of trafficking in tourist destinations. Amber's decision to speak publicly came with a cost. She received threatening messages from people associated with the organization, people who had escaped prosecution, and blamed her testimony for sending their associates to prison. The FBI provided her with security consultations and helped her take precautions to protect her identity and location. But Amber refused to be silenced. "I survived the worst they could do to me," she told her father. "I'm not going to hide for the rest of my life." Robert Whitaker channeled his own trauma into action. He established the Amber Whitaker Foundation, dedicated to helping families of missing persons abroad navigate foreign legal systems and conduct private investigations when official channels failed them. The foundation provided financial assistance for travel, translation services, legal representation, and even private investigators for families who couldn't afford these resources on their own. The foundation also lobbied for legislative changes to improve how American authorities responded to reports of citizens in danger abroad. Robert testified before Congress about the bureaucratic obstacles he encountered when trying to get help for Amber. arguing that the system was failing Americans who became victims of crimes in foreign countries. Some of his proposed changes were incorporated into legislation that improved coordination between American embassies, the State Department, and law enforcement agencies investigating crimes against American citizens abroad. Chelsea Whitaker left her marketing job and went back to school to become a social worker, specifically focusing on helping trauma survivors. She credited her sister's experience with showing her that she wanted to dedicate her career to helping people recover from the worst experiences of their lives. The sisters remained extraordinarily close, talking almost every day and supporting each other through the ongoing process of healing. Jessica Brennan, the photographer who had first reached out to Robert when Amber disappeared, became an advocate for expat community awareness about trafficking operations. She worked with local organizations in Cancun to educate foreign residents about warning signs and how to report suspicious activities. Her work helped create a network of people watching for vulnerable tourists and intervening before they could be victimized. Detective David Martinez continued his work leading the anti-trafficking task force, using evidence from the Rivas case to build additional prosecutions against people and organizations involved in trafficking throughout Mexico. The database of victims recovered from the laptops helped authorities identify and locate women who had been missing for years, providing closure to some families who had given up hope. Agent Sarah Chen remained with the FBI's Human Trafficking Division, working on cases throughout Latin America. She stayed in contact with Amber and other survivors, checking in periodically and providing support. Chen had worked hundreds of trafficking cases during her career, but Amber's case stood out to her as an example of how family members' refusal to give up could make the difference between rescue and permanent disappearance. The other women rescued with Amber had various outcomes. Irina Volkov returned to Russia and was working with anti-trafficking organizations there, speaking publicly about her experience. 2 Colombian women who had been found at the Puerto Morelos property were still in therapy and had returned home with their families. Not all survivors recovered quickly or successfully, but all of them were alive and free, which was more than could be said for victims who had never been found. In December 2021, almost 3 years after her rescue, Amber attended a ceremony in Washington, D.C., where she received an award from an international organization dedicated to combating human trafficking. She was recognized for her courage in testifying against her abusers and for her work helping other survivors. During her acceptance speech, Amber spoke about how trauma had changed her, but hadn't defeated her. "I was targeted because someone thought I was weak and vulnerable," she said to the audience of advocates, survivors, and officials. "What my abusers didn't count on was my family refusing to let me disappear, and my own refusal to let this experience be the end of my story. I'm still here, I'm still fighting, and I'm using what happened to me to help make sure fewer women have to go through what I went through. That's not weakness, that's strength." The ceremony was attended by Robert and Chelsea, along with Detective Martinez and Agent Chen. Seeing Amber standing at that podium, speaking confidently about her experience and her ongoing recovery, Robert felt overwhelming pride mixed with residual pain over what his daughter had endured. But he also felt hope. Hope that Amber would continue healing. Hope that the work being done to combat trafficking would save lives. Hope that something good could come from the nightmare their family had survived. As Robert watched his daughter speak, he thought about how close he had come to losing her forever. If he had accepted those first dismissive responses from authorities, if he had given up when the official channels failed, if Jessica hadn't reached out with crucial information, Amber might never have been found. The experience had taught him that sometimes fighting the system and refusing to accept easy answers was the only way to get justice. After the ceremony, as Amber stood surrounded by supporters and fellow survivors, She caught her father's eye across the room. He nodded at her, that simple gesture conveying years of shared experience, love that had been tested but never broken, and pride in how far she had come from that terrified woman rescued from a basement in Playa del Carmen. Amber nodded back, and in that moment, both father and daughter understood that while the scars from Mexico would never completely fade, they didn't have to define the rest of their lives. 3 years after the trial, life continued for those touched by the case. Amber had moved to Portland, started a new career helping crime victims access resources, and was in a careful, slow relationship with someone who understood her need for patience as she continued healing. She still had difficult days, times when memories overwhelmed her, or when news stories about trafficking triggered flashbacks. But she also had good days, weeks even, where she could laugh freely and imagine a future not dominated by trauma. The foundation Robert had created was helping 30 families whose loved ones had disappeared abroad, providing them with resources and support. Several of those cases had resulted in successful rescues, directly because of lessons learned from Amber's experience. Robert had retired from his construction business to work full-time on the foundation, finding new purpose in helping other parents navigate the nightmares he had endured. In Cancun, the reforms implemented after the trial had mixed success. Some property owners and businesses took the new regulations seriously, implementing better background checks and reporting suspicious activities, but others found ways around the new rules, and trafficking operations adapted to the increased scrutiny. Martinez's task force continued making arrests and rescuing victims, but they all knew it was an ongoing battle that would never be fully won. The luxury apartment where Amber had briefly lived with Arturo had new tenants who had no idea of the darkness that had unfolded there 3 years earlier. The beaches remained beautiful. The resorts continued attracting millions of tourists each year, and Cancun's reputation as a paradise destination endured despite the exposure of the horrors hidden beneath its glamorous surface. But some things had genuinely changed. Tourist awareness of romance scams and trafficking operations increased significantly after Amber's case received international attention. Women traveling alone were more cautious about whirlwind romances with local men making grand promises. Families were more skeptical when loved ones announced plans to move abroad for relationships that seemed too perfect. The collective awakening wasn't total, but it was real. Arturo Rivas remained in federal prison, where he would likely die of old age before completing his sentence. He had given interviews to several journalists from prison, claiming he had been unfairly prosecuted and that his relationships with women had been genuine. No one who knew the facts of the case believed him. His pathological narcissism prevented him from ever taking responsibility for the lives he had destroyed. Rafael Ortega had proven to be a valuable cooperating witness, his testimony helping convict several additional members of the organization who had initially escaped prosecution. He expressed remorse for his role in trafficking, though survivors questioned whether his regret was genuine or simply a performance to reduce his sentence. He would still spend decades in prison, time to reflect on the pain he had helped inflict on dozens of women. Elena Vargas had never admitted guilt, maintaining to anyone who would listen that she had simply been a businesswoman caught up in others' crimes. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and no one believed her protestations of innocence. She filed multiple appeals that were all denied, each time receiving confirmation that the justice system had correctly assessed her guilt. The victims who survived, including Amber, formed an informal support network. They stayed in touch through encrypted messages and occasional video calls, checking in on each other and providing encouragement during difficult times. Some friendships formed naturally between women who shared the unique trauma of having been targeted by the same organization. Others preferred to move forward without reminders of that dark period. All coped in their own ways with the aftermath of victimization. Nicole Harper, the survivor whose earlier testimony had helped investigators understand the organization's structure, completed a college degree and was working as an advocate for trafficking survivors. She and Amber had become friends, bonding over their shared experience of being rescued from the same criminal network. Together, they spoke at conferences and schools, warning young people about the realities of romance scams and trafficking operations. On the 5th anniversary of Amber's rescue, Robert organized a small gathering in Iowa for family, close friends, and some of the key people who had helped save her life. Detective Martinez flew in from Mexico, as did Agent Chen. Jessica Brennan came from Cancun. Amber's closest friends from her Chicago days attended, as did several survivors from the same organization. During dinner, Robert stood to give a toast. 5 years ago, he began, his voice emotional. I thought I had lost my daughter forever. I thought the people who took her would win because they had operated for so long without consequences. But everyone in this room proved that evil doesn't always prevail. Because you didn't give up. Because you fought back. My daughter is alive and healing. Other daughters are home with their families. A criminal organization was dismantled. And maybe, just maybe, some future victims were saved because this operation was exposed. He raised his glass. To Amber's courage in surviving and finding her voice. To everyone who refused to accept easy answers or look away from difficult truths. To justice, even when it comes slower and less perfectly than we'd like. And to the future, which is brighter because all of you chose to fight darkness rather than accept it. The room raised their glasses, and Amber felt tears on her cheeks. Not tears of sadness or trauma, but tears of gratitude for being alive, for being surrounded by people who loved her, and for having somehow found strength she didn't know she possessed. The road from that terrified phone call to Chelsea to this moment had been longer and harder than she could have imagined. But she had traveled it, and she was still here. As the gathering continued into the evening, Amber stepped outside onto the porch of her childhood home. Chelsea joined her, and the two sisters stood together looking at the Iowa sky, so different from the tropical Mexican sky that had witnessed such darkness. "You okay?" Chelsea asked softly. Amber nodded. "I'm okay. I mean, I'm not always okay. But right now, in this moment, I'm okay. That's enough." Chelsea put her arm around her sister. "That's more than enough. You survived something that should have destroyed you. You testified against monsters. You're helping other survivors. You're rebuilding your life. I'm so proud of you." Amber leaned her head on Chelsea's shoulder, feeling the comfort of family, of home, of being safe. "I couldn't have done any of it without you and Dad. When I was in that basement thinking I might never get out, I kept picturing Dad's face and knowing he wouldn't stop looking for me. That hope kept me alive." The sisters stood together in comfortable silence, both thinking about how close they had come to this ending very differently. Inside, they could hear their father's laugh as he told a story to the gathered friends. The sound was a reminder that life continued, that joy could coexist with remembered pain, and that family bonds could survive even the darkest tests. Amber Whitaker's story ended not with simple triumph or complete tragedy, but with something more realistic and human. Survival, slow healing, and the ongoing work of building a life worth living after trauma. She would never be the same person who had naively followed a charming man to Mexico 5 years earlier, but she was someone stronger, someone more aware, someone committed to ensuring that her suffering might prevent others' suffering. The luxury resorts of Cancun continued operating, and tourists continued arriving in pursuit of paradise. But some of those tourists now traveled with more caution, more awareness that beauty and danger could coexist, and more knowledge that romantic dreams could hide nightmarish realities. And if Amber's story prevented even one person from becoming a victim, if her courage in speaking out saved even one life, then perhaps there was purpose in her pain. As Amber walked back inside to rejoin the celebration of her survival, she carried with her the weight of everything she had been through and the determination to keep moving forward. She was alive, she was free, she was healing, and she would spend the rest of her life making sure that what happened to her and so many other women would not be forgotten, would not be dismissed, and would not be allowed to continue unchallenged in the shadows of paradise.